Hi everybody, I'm Debbie Busby. Thanks for joining me this afternoon for this talk about horse behaviour and welfare. I am recovering from a cold and after I've had a cold I lose my voice, so I hope that it's going to last for the next 30 minutes. So I'll just tell you a little bit about me. You might want to know why I think I'm qualified to tell you what I'm going to tell you about horses. I'm a clinical animal behaviourist based in the UK but working internationally, and I help horse owners to resolve any serious behavioural disorders that they might encounter with their horses. I'm qualified to do this at master's level, and I'm registered with the Animal Behaviour and Training Council in the UK, which regulates training and behaviour therapy and represents practitioners to the public and to Parliament. And as part of my work, I use my knowledge of ethology and the natural behaviour of horses to advise owners on meeting their horses' essential needs in order to have a healthy horse and to have one that's safe just to hang out with or to go and ride on and just generally have fun with. So the other thing I need to tell you is that my bad, I sent Nat the wrong set of slides. So the slides that you've got in your handout are only ever so slightly different to the ones that you're going to see now, and the references might be a bit different as well. So maybe Nat can send out the right ones later. So today, what am I going to tell you about? Just a brief introduction to the 5 domains model of animal welfare. Then we're going to take a look at how equine ethology and typical management practices can help or hinder the aim of a positive welfare state. And we'll see why I've called this talk a fish out of water, and what we can do to help the fish back into the water or the horse back into its ecological niche. So to put the 5 domains into context, we need to understand the trajectory of animal welfare research and policy over the last 50 years. And that's starting with the recommendations of the Bramble Committee, which I'm sure you all know about, the 5 freedoms, which now underpin much of farm and companion animal welfare legislation and good practice guidance. So the idea of the 5 domains actually, although it's become a bit more widely known now, it first appeared in 1994 in a paper on laboratory animal welfare by Mellor and Reed, where the authors argued that the words welfare and well-being were interchangeable, and that good welfare or well-being is a state of being which is manifest in an animal when its nutritional, environmental, health, behavioural and mental needs are all met. And the authors related these needs back to the 5 freedoms, and they used the 5 freedoms as a basis for developing a new system of assessing the impact on the animal of using it in laboratory experiments as they were studying at the time. And in this way, they transformed the idea of the 5 freedoms into what they called domains of potential compromise. So that's what the 5 domains relate to. So they redefined the 5 freedoms to emphasise the extent of welfare compromise rather than the earlier ideal of the absence of compromise. So the 5 domains involved are domain 1. I'm just going to see what's on the next slide, and then I'm going to go back. So domain 1 is thirst, hunger and malnutrition. Domain number 2 is about environmental challenge. 3 relates to disease, injury or functional impairment. And 4 relates to behavioural or interactive restrictions. That's an inability to behave in the species-specific way of that animal. And domain 5 covered anxiety, fear, pain and distress, which all combine together to denote the mental state of the animal. So the idea was, when they were looking at laboratory animals, that a research proposal would be examined systematically in all the domains, and each domain would be given a rating relating to the degree of compromise arising in that domain. I think I might move on to the next slide, which you've also got in your notes as well, because I wasn't sure how clearly that would come up, but in fact it does come up really well, so that's great. So this degree of compromise for each of the domains was rated on a 5-step non-numerical scale of severity, and the anxiety or fear or pain or distress arising from the compromise that was observed in domains 1 through to 4 was then accumulated into the 5th domain of mental state. And then, so the overall rating of the welfare compromise would typically be the one that arose out of domain 5. And then just to go back a slide, just to finish off the historical context, at the same time that the 5 domains was being developed, at the same time that that work was being developed and extended beyond the area of laboratory animals, we've got the work done by the Farm Animal Welfare Council, who looked at quality of life concepts, not just relating to the absence of compromise, but setting minimum welfare standards that afforded a life worth living, which you've just heard Anne speaking about, and informed again by the work of David Mellor and Nio Beausoleil at Massey University in New Zealand. So I've had a quick look at that slide. I'm not going to say too much about this one for reasons of time, and you've got it in your handouts. And I want to move on to some of the more practical aspects of equine welfare and well-being. But from this one, I just want to point out that following his work on the 5 domains, David Mellor then developed this idea further into the idea of the 5 provisions, which you can see on this slide. And they relate back to the 5 domains, and they are good nutrition, a good environment, good health, a suitable environment or suitable conditions where the animal can express its species-specific behaviours. And then lastly, positive mental experiences. And crucially included in that is the idea of a sense of control, which I'm going to move on to when we look at the concept of agency as a correlate of animal welfare, and that's kind of psychological agency. Just to finish off on the 5 domains, we have examples here of cross-domain interactions. So there's always a kind of survival-related domain. The first 3 domains relate to survival aspects of the animal's existence, phenomenology you might even call it. So you've got the survival needs, and then the behaviour is motivated by those, and the behaviour is expressed through domain 4. So this is some thirsty trekking horses in the Jordanian desert, and they found a spring or a well, so they've exercised seeking behaviour to go and drink that water. And again, some horses that are just grazing normally in a paddock, they got hot, so they wanted to cool off, so they actively went to seek the shade under the tree. So that's another example of a cross-domain interaction. More water. So here's my definition of agency that I'm going to be using in this talk. It's the subjective awareness of initiating, executing and controlling one's own volitional actions in the world. And when we look at how we can enhance the agentic experience of a horse that's confined or intensively managed, a crucial element of any animal's day-to-day experience is the extent to which they can exercise choice and control over their environment, and this has a significant effect on their welfare. So in a free-living horse's day, in contrast to a typical managed horse, intensively managed horse in a riding school or a livery yard, they are almost constantly making choices about what they're going to do next, whether it's run 500 metres along a valley with its friend, or eat a particularly tasty piece of tree, or stand in just the right spot where the sun warms their backs the best. And an inability to make these choices, either because the horse's space is restricted, or because the resources to engage in that behaviour are not present, can contribute to stress and anxiety. And animals in captivity, including domestic horses, have the vast majority of choices made for them by their human caretakers. They also have little or no control over the environment that surrounds them. But researchers have found that even having the really smallest choices in that environment, however restricted, can have a positive effect on welfare and the emotional state of that animal. And this can even be as small as having 2 different water containers for horses. So you might have in a stable a bucket on the floor, and on the wall you might have an automatic water container that the horse can drink from. So just having that choice of the 2 different receptacles to drink from was found to make a difference. If we look at how we can enhance good welfare, then we can do it by creating positive elements that are found within the 5 domains, and by doing this we may also reduce the likelihood and or the impact of the negative emotional affect that we see in circumstances where the horse's needs are compromised. And the ways in which we can enhance good welfare include environmental enrichment, cognitive enrichment, making sure meeting species-specific needs are met, facilitating, so allowing species-specific behaviours to be carried out, and avoiding fear, anxiety and stress, and then reward-based training. I'm going to talk to you about all of those except for reward-based training, because my esteemed colleague Nicola is going to talk to you about that next. So let's take a look then at what the horse's species-specific needs are, because if we don't know what they are, we don't know if we're meeting them or not meeting them. It's been suggested that horses, like people, have a hierarchy of needs, and for horses, their most fundamental need as a prey species is safety. And this is the reason why horses have such highly developed reactions to threat and why they have such strong affiliative needs, because there's safety in numbers, as we've already heard in the talk on the previous prey species. So the full list of essential daily behaviours is what you can see here. So let's just talk about those in a bit more detail. So in terms of safety, horses live in social groups. This is free-living horses. Live in social groups that are settled and constant. So they don't change except on a species appropriate, or except in a species appropriate way. So some fillies might leave a natal band, and some young males might do that, but it's not through the intervention of humans. So the individuals in those groups will typically have a preferred partner or a pair bond for mutual protection. So for example, one will stay alert while the other one dozes. Eating and drinking behaviour is the next level on the hierarchy, and for horses, eating behaviour involves grazing and browsing for 16 hours a day, and up to 10% of a horse's natural diet is made up of browsing on logs, branches, twigs and leaves, and that's retained from their early evolution as a small browsing species that lived in forests. So horses don't feel safe, for example, if they are isolated. So if that's the case, then they might stop eating, or they might become fussy eaters, and that's a problem for horse owners typically. And similarly, horses that evolved to drink in groups for safety, when you have that as their species-specific fallback, you can see that an isolated horse might fail to take in adequate water. The next level, physical maintenance, so that's self-grooming, where they might scratch or rub themselves on a convenient tree or post. Rolling, where they roll on the ground in sand or mud to get rid of flies or just to scratch themselves. And elimination. So they need to feel safe enough to perform all those behaviours. And in a suitable environment also, horses would be able to regulate their own temperature by moving into or out of sunlight, shelter or shade. Next essential behaviour is to be able to rest and to sleep. And again, this is something that horses need to feel safe in order to do, to act out their normal sleep patterns. They rely on the group, or at least one other horse, in close proximity to be the lookout post, as I've said. And horses are crepuscular, so they're most active at dawn and dusk. And their sleep pattern is polyphasic. That is, that they will sleep or they will idle, which is just when you see horses in fields just hanging around doing nothing. Could be because they've actually got nothing else to do, but this is out of choice. Dozing or just resting for short periods. So they do this for short periods of time throughout the 24-hour period, and they need to be able to mirror these patterns in their domestic environment. So what's next? Play and exercise. So horses move a lot. They do it to find resources, to escape from threats, and also to play. So movement for horses is essential for effective physiological function. And a healthy horse should have sufficient space to walk, run and play, and essentially with other group members. Exploration is next, and that's kind of exploratory or investigative behaviour. So horses explore their environment through movement and through what we call object play, which is exploration of objects or playing with objects, using their nose, their lips, their mouth, and that can be for reasons of exploration, or it can also be a positive emotional experience for them. So it comes into also the aspect of play, and we can use it to really good effect in environmental enrichment too. And finally, associative behaviour, so that's the crucial element, the social element of equine needs. The horse is an affiliative social species, they form pair bonds, engage in play, mutual grooming and interaction with their preferred buddy and other members of the group. So mutual grooming, again, when you see, oh, that's not the picture here, unfortunately. So sometimes you will see two horses standing so that they're able to nuzzle the base of each other's necks, and that's something that can be done in a body maintenance kind of way, or it can be done to develop affiliative bonds between those two horses. So if we look at the comparing time budgets then of horses that are kept in different situations. So a time budget or an activity budget or an energy budget is a way of classifying the proportion of time that an animal spends carrying out the different behaviours in a 24-hour period. And Martha Kiley Worthington found that free-ranging Camargue horses spent 60% of the day eating and moving around at the same time that they were eating, and 20% standing. And in contrast, horses who were kept stabled and fed restricted forage, which is typical for a lot of managed horses, traditionally managed horses, they spent only 15% of their day eating and 65% of their day just standing around in that empty stable, doing nothing in a barren, confined environment. And they spent more time lying down as well. And interestingly, but not surprisingly, given the horse's fundamental need to live in social groups, another group of managed horses who were kept in group housing, so that's a barn, a multi-horse barn, so not individual stables, who were also fed ad lib hay and bedded on straw, they showed a time budget that most closely resembled the one that was seen in the free-ranging horses. So what is it about domestic life then that means the horse might be described as a fish out of water? Horses in the UK are typically kept on livery yards where each owner rents a stable and also some grazing for their horse, sometimes horses, from a yard owner. Sometimes it's 3 or 4 horses on a yard, it can be 60 horses, it can be over 100. The one owner, one horse phenomenon can be a significant factor in how horses are managed, and this includes the normal cultural practice of buying and selling horses, moving them from one place to another, in a way that we wouldn't normally do with our pet dog or cat, for example, unless we were moving at the same time. So it's common practice to house horses in an individual stable overnight and to turn them out to graze during the day. In winter, they can even be kept indoors for days at a time, and that's in, or weeks at a time, and that's in a 3-metre square stable. And the reason that's done is to save valuable grassland in the winter. And more often these days, I'm seeing horses that are turned out not in groups, but individually, even if there are other horses available to be turned out with. More and more, I'm seeing those horses divided up and turned out into individual paddocks. And even if they do go out in groups, the makeup of that group might frequently change because horses are moved around between the groups, horses are bought and sold, moved on and off the yard. And quite often you'll find that mares and geldings are often separated into different groups. So all these traditional practices compromise the social lives of horses, and they prevent them from carrying out many of the behaviours that form their natural ethogram. And sterile environments in the form of uninspiring fields also contribute to this deficit. So it means that horses can't carry out many of their basic, fundamental natural behaviours, such as foraging or choosing when and where to seek water, shelter or shade, and social isolation then and conflict that occurs as a result of that are significant concerns. Moving swiftly on. So this creates anxiety and stress, not surprisingly, in horses, the inability to meet their natural needs and the inability to exercise choice or agency. So let's look in a bit more detail then about why this might be the case. We can clearly see that horses kept in stables, which is the equivalent of a broom cupboard really in human terms, and who don't have enough exercise are not having their needs met. Same applies to horses that are confined in small yards or paddocks. And this has the effect of adversely affecting physical functioning and adaptability because all organisms seek homeostasis or biological stability. And the body's ability to adjust its physiological systems is optimised when the animal is able to perform their ethological repertoire of behaviours. So when the behaviours are prevented, it leads to anxiety and stress. Long-term stress results, amongst other things, in chronic arousal of the autonomic nervous system and overstimulation of the HPA axis, which connects the central nervous system and the endocrine or hormonal system in the body through the hypothalamus, the pituitary and the adrenal glands, hence HPA axis. Release of stress hormones increases susceptibility to disease and dysfunction, typically causing inflammation and immunosuppression. So in horses, examples of that we might see are gastric ulcers and skin conditions such as sweet itch, which is an inflammatory skin condition that appears in horses. We also see stereotypical behaviour as a result of this. So that's something else we need to consider, and that I'm going to just show you a quick video of this actually because it's probably better to understand it in that way. And I can't get out now. Oh, it's all right. Done it. So this is just one example of a stereotypical behaviour which is crib biting in horses. So some of you might not have actually seen a horse doing this. And other examples are wind sucking, box walking, and weaving as well, where the horse stands at the door and at the stable door and just weaves from side to side. So it's grasping hold of the door there, and then it's kind of ingesting air at the same time as it's doing that, and that's not a normal behaviour that you would see. Okay, so stereotypies are another concern, and risk factors associated with those are, again, restricted feeding, reduced social contact, diminished locomotor activity. Another behavioural issue that affects riders is something called behavioural rebound or post-inhibitory rebound. And again, it's something where the horse has, for a period of time, had some of its movement behaviours inhibited by being confined in a small environment. So when they are actually then put back into an area where they can move, they perform rather explosive behaviours. And sometimes this happens when there is a rider on them, which can be dangerous. So can you see them bucking and sort of kicking the heels of there? So that, so you might think, well, they look happy and running around and enjoying themselves, but they're doing it more than they probably typically would in that situation because that behaviour was prevented previously. And if you're a nervous rider or a novice rider or a beginner rider and you're on a horse that's motivated to move fast and you just want it to walk, that can be a problem for you. So I think I am running out of time. So all I'm going to say about this slide is that friends, forage and freedom are the important things that horses need to have access to be healthy and safe, and that's physiologically healthy and mentally healthy. Choice and control I've already spoken about. Another way that you can kind of meet the horse's interspecies need for social affiliation is just to kind of hang out with your horse. You don't always have to be schooling them or riding them. You can hang out outside their stable. If they're on box rest, you can go into the field with them and just read a book or clear down your emails or watch YouTube or anything. Just hang out with your horse and be a bringer of good things that they're going to enjoy and that's going to kind of improve their view of the world, really. I'm going to whiz through, how many minutes have I got? Right, okay, I'm just going to whiz through this. These are other things that you can do as enrichment opportunities for your horse. So again, this is all about forage, and I think most of you who are horsey probably know about these previous suggestions anyway. Spreading food around rather than just feeding it in a bucket is an important one, because horses eat on the move. They kind of graze a bit, move a bit, graze a bit, move a bit. Herbal tea is a brilliant idea for horses. So these are buckets of herbal tea, load of tea bags, hot water. Make sure that the water gets cold or cool, and pour it over hay to make the hay more interesting. As we heard Anne say before, these species don't eat one species of forage. So this is a way of increasing the variety in any way that you can in their lives. This is another way that you can do it. So somebody has gone to, I mean, that's a work of art, isn't it, really? The lengths that somebody's got to twist that rope, stick the carrots in, decorate it with cow parsley. It's a wonderful thing, yeah, and then you just watch it being destroyed. It's all for the horse's benefit. This is, I just want to, emphasise this really as a last important point, is going back to what I was saying before about horses One of the species-specific play patterns of a horse is object play, where they play with objects, does what it says on the tin. This is a way that you can facilitate that with a horse. So you get any kind of container, fill it with things that are different shapes and different textures, sprinkle a little bit of something, nice food in the bottom, just to sort of encourage them to explore it first of all. And that really is a brilliant way of enriching their environment, similar to the Find It game that Chris was talking about, or also if some of you use the cardboard box game with dogs, where you just like scrunch up a load of newspaper, stick it in a cardboard box, add some treats, dog happy for quite a long time. Just very, very lastly, I have no idea why I've headed this cognitive enrichment, because at best, okay, could say it's exploration if it's in a very sterile environment and that's the only thing the horse has got to investigate. You could say it's object play, or as I quite often argue when I see videos of horses running around, like a young horse on its own running around with a gym ball, it's more likely to turn into frustration, I think. What else can you do? Natural browsing behaviour, you know, those horses are lucky enough to have that amazing tree in their thing that doesn't look like a paddock, it looks like a whole hill that they're turned out on, so they can do browsing. The owner, nice kind owner, has added logs to the grazing areas so that the horses can engage in their browsing activity. The same owner, look at this, if you're a landscape gardener out of work or struggling for work, this is what you can turn your hand to. So somebody has created this like fake stream bed and bridge in a horse's field just to make the environment a little bit more interesting, which is amazing. And then next to it, we've got a sand rolling area. You don't have to prepare the sand rolling area, just dump the sand and the horses will do the spreading around with their feet and then rolling it, because that's what they like to do. Scratching post on the right, on my left,
our right,
your right. Those are some kind of mats that you can get from DIY shops, and you stick them round a very, very sturdy post, and horses can use them to scratch their bums or their heads or whatever they want to scratch at suitable horse height. Right, I've got like 10 seconds left. I think this thing here is amazing. The owner has called it a misting station, and it is an old hose, garden hose, with holes stuck into it, and then she's stuck it on the tree, and then she's put the tap on a timer, so at 1 o'clock every day, I don't know how it happens, but the tap gets turned on, and water, well, like a gentle mist really, comes out of these little holes. And the horses have learned 1 o'clock misting time, so they all wander over. I'm sure that I don't know how many horses there are. Let's not talk about resource guarding issues today. But anyway, that's what they do. They all wander over there and just stand and get wafted with misty water. Oh, that's it. That's the end. Oh, and there's a book, not surprisingly. So I've contributed a chapter to this book. It's written by members of the Equine Behaviour and Training Association who are here, and it's pretty useful, and lots of people have been saying nice things about it. So there's some copies at the back to buy or just to leaf through if you want to.
How much is it, Debs? Worth every penny.
Yeah, it's I don't know, around between £20 and £24 maybe. We'll find out.
We'll find out.
The end. Thank you
Thank
for
you
listening.
very much.